Today, we bring you the story of a quiet, determined woman who finds herself in a startling confrontation with an overconfident officer in a bustling city. Little does he know, the very person he's arresting holds the key to justice in more ways than one. Where are you watching from right now? Let us know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe for more inspiring stories just like this one. Welcome to the Motivation for Success channel, where each tale we share is designed to spark hope, reflection, and a renewed sense of compassion in our everyday lives. Stay tuned until the end of this astonishing account of misplaced assumptions, public humiliation, and the humbling power of truth. By the time we reach the final moments in court, everyone is left wondering, who exactly is this woman, and why is the judge so shocked to see her in chains? In the early hours of a cool autumn morning, the city of Riverton had yet to fully awaken. Gentle street lamps flickered in the half-light as a handful of cars rumbled along deserted roads. On Maplewood Avenue, an older district lined with modest, brick apartment buildings, a woman named Henrietta Winston began her day before dawn, as she always did. Henrietta, a woman in her early 70s, lived on the third floor of a complex that had seen better days. Paint flaked on door frames, and the scent of coffee drifted through the hallways, hinting at quiet domestic routines. Residents knew one another by sight, exchanging nods in the corridors, though rarely stopping to chat. Yet, everyone recognized Henrietta. There was an air of quiet dignity about her, as though she were perpetually standing at the threshold of some important mission. Henrietta's apartment was small but tidy. Sun-bleached curtains framed a single window overlooking the street, letting in the pale glow of morning light. The place had minimal furnishings, just enough to make it comfortable, a sturdy armchair by the window, shelves of neatly organized files and binders, and a slim table that served as both desk and dining spot. That morning, as she often did, Henrietta dressed in understated clothing, a plain skirt, a well-worn cardigan, and sensible shoes. She brushed back her silver hair and pinned it neatly into place. With practiced hands, she prepared a mug of tea, the steam gently fogging her glasses. Today was no ordinary day, she had an important meeting at Riverton District Court. In the corner of her living room stood a battered canvas tote bag. Within it lay folders, legal briefs, and carefully drafted petitions, documents she had spent countless hours reviewing. They were crucial to her mission, addressing a long-standing housing dispute that affected dozens of families in her community. For months, she had been working behind the scenes to ensure these families received the fair treatment they deserved under the law. By the time Henrietta stepped outside, the city was beginning to stir. The sky above Riverton glowed with soft pink hues, and the hum of distant traffic grew steadily louder. She clutched her tote bag against her side, double-checking to ensure all of her documents were in order. "Where are you watching from?" a sign on a nearby bus stop bench read, an advertisement for a local media channel. Henrietta paused for a moment, recalling that fleeting sense of curiosity people often have about one another. "Where am I watching from?" she mused. "Right here, in a city that sometimes forgets its own neighbors." Little did she know she was about to become the subject of a far more dramatic question. As Henrietta made her way down Beechwood Street, she noticed a young mother struggling to maneuver a stroller over a cracked section of pavement. The woman also held a large grocery bag that kept tilting at precarious angles, threatening to spill onto the sidewalk. Without a second thought, Henrietta approached. "Excuse me, would you like a hand?" she asked in a gentle voice. The mother, startled but relieved, nodded. "Yes, thank you so much." Henrietta rearranged the groceries and steadied the stroller wheels. The mother's grateful eyes met hers. "I really appreciate it," the young woman said. "I'm new here, and well, it's been a bit overwhelming." Henrietta gave her a reassuring smile. "Riverton can be challenging at first, but it's full of kind people. I hope you find what you need here." They parted ways, the mother's spirits visibly lifted, and Henrietta continued on to her bus stop. She never imagined that her small act of kindness would become a fleeting bright spot in an otherwise grueling day. Not far down the block, a police cruiser crawled along at a snail's pace. Inside, Officer Russell Clay was nearing the end of his night shift. Tall, lean, and in his late 20s, Officer Clay had sharp features and an air of restless ambition. He harbored a belief that criminals lurked behind every corner, waiting for an opportunity. Riverton streets, in his mind, were rife with wrongdoing that only he could quell. His eyes flicked to Henrietta as she hurried to catch her bus. Her purposeful stride and the heavy-looking tote bag piqued his curiosity. "What's an older lady doing out here so early?" he thought. "And what's she carrying in that bag?" Instinct told him to keep watch. He slowed the cruiser even further, observing Henrietta as she stood at the corner of Juniper Road, glancing at the schedule posted. Near the bus shelter. She seemed harmless enough, just another local resident. But something about her calm confidence triggered his suspicion. Officer Clay pulled over, cut the engine, and stepped out of the cruiser. His hand rested near his holster, a gesture he found himself adopting far too often. "Ma'am," he called. "Hold on a second. I'd like to speak with you." Henrietta, startled, turned around. She clutched her tote bag against her hip. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, her voice steady but polite. Officer Clay's eyes flicked down at her bag. "What brings you out so early? Where are you heading?" Henrietta didn't appreciate the tone, slightly accusing, as though she were trespassing. Still, she answered, "I have official business at the courthouse." He eyed her skeptically. "May I see some identification?" Henrietta produced her ID, her mind spinning. Why is he doing this? She wondered. Still, she kept her composure. If she let fear or anger rise, she'd only worsen the situation. Officer Clay studied her ID and briefly inspected the name, Henrietta Winston. No criminal record popped up when he mentally recalled the local watch list. He handed it back, his expression still guarded. "What's in the bag?" he persisted. "It's just paperwork for a legal proceeding," Henrietta said. "I'm due in court." Without asking for permission, Officer Clay reached for her tote. Henrietta reflexively pulled away. "That's private, officer," she said, her tone quiet but firm. Clay's demeanor hardened. "Ma'am, step aside. I need to check that bag." Henrietta felt her pulse quicken. This was clearly an overreach. She had spent decades studying the law. If he found the right document in her files, he'd realize she wasn't just a random senior citizen. Still, she doubted he'd look that closely. This is how people get railroaded, she told herself silently. When she did not immediately comply, Officer Clay barked, "Are you resisting an investigation?" Before Henrietta could respond, he seized her by the arm and twisted it behind her back. She winced at the sudden bolt of pain shooting up her shoulder. Gasps arose from a few early morning passers-by. Henrietta tried to remain calm, forcing herself to breathe. "I've done nothing wrong," she managed, even as the cold bite of handcuffs encircled her wrists. Clay muttered something about suspicious activity and refusal to comply. In moments, Henrietta found herself pressed against the side of the police cruiser, humiliated and in disbelief. Her heart sank further when she glimpsed the young mother from earlier, standing several yards away with her child. The mother looked aghast, pressing a hand to her mouth as though she couldn't believe what she was witnessing. Time blurred for Henrietta. One moment, she was helping a stranger. The next, she was locked in the back of a police car, her personal documents unceremoniously dumped onto the front seat. She heard Officer Clay radio for backup and casually mention an elderly suspect. The words twisted like a knife in her stomach. The cruiser rumbled through Riverton streets, heading for the precinct. Unable to free her hands, Henrietta could only watch as the city passed by, the same city she'd spent years advocating for, especially on behalf of vulnerable tenants. She had never imagined a day like this would come. At the station, the booking process was a study in practiced indifference. Her photograph was taken. She was fingerprinted. She tried to explain, but each explanation was met with cold shrugs or condescending remarks. She heard bits of mockery. What could she be up to at her age? Maybe she's an old pro at something. Sure she's not packing stolen property in those files. Henrietta clenched her jaw, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her falter. This wasn't the first time she'd been underestimated, but it was the first time she'd been treated like a criminal. Hours ticked by in a dull, fluorescent haze. Eventually, an officer informed her she'd be arraigned in the morning. Until then, she had to spend the night in a holding cell. The bench was cold metal, and the overhead light never dimmed. Henrietta tried to rest, but sleep evaded her. Memories of her late husband flitted through her mind. He had been the first to spark her passion for legal advocacy, urging her to attend night classes and eventually earn her credential as a legal consultant. If only he could see me now, she thought wryly. I'm being locked up for the crime of walking to the bus stop. Her anger simmered, but she whispered a quiet reassurance to herself, you've faced worse. You'll find a way through this. By the following morning, news of Henrietta's arrest had begun to circulate among the staff at Riverton District Court. Still, no one suspected the quiet older woman in the holding cell was the Henrietta Winston, chief advisor to the city's Housing Rights Commission. She was a pivotal figure in drafting legislation to protect low-income tenants and had personally filed countless briefs that led to significant legal reforms. As the sun spilled over the horizon, Henrietta was led in shackles to a transport van that would drive her the short distance to the courthouse. Officer Clay, looking smug, strode along behind her. He radiated confidence, as though certain he was about to close yet another minor case. Other detainees looked on in confusion, wondering why a senior citizen was among them. Inside the courthouse, the usual bustle of attorneys and staffers filled the corridors. Henrietta was steered toward a courtroom where her arraignment would take place. As soon as she entered, she felt the weight of curious eyes on her. Judge LaSalle, a stern-faced woman with deep-set eyes, presided over the session. Judge LaSalle ran through a list of minor cases before finally arriving at Henrietta's. She peered at the name on the docket, then looked up with a slight frown. Henrietta Winston, accused of suspicious activity, resisting a lawful order, and potential theft. Officer in charge is Russell Clay, the judge read. A rustle of confusion swept through the room. Several legal aides recognized the name Henrietta Winston and began whispering among themselves. Officer Clay, with arms crossed, gave a self-satisfied nod. Judge LaSalle narrowed her eyes. Let's hear from the arresting officer first. Clay stepped forward, presenting his narrative of events. He described seeing Henrietta on the street with unknown suspicious materials, her alleged reluctance to comply with an inspection, and so forth. He spoke as though no further detail was necessary. I see, Judge LaSalle remarked. She turned to Henrietta, who stood behind a worn wooden table, her wrists still shackled. Ms. Winston, do you have anything to say for yourself? Henrietta exhaled. Yes, Your Honor. I do, she said, her voice carrying a quiet authority that made Clay glance at her with fresh curiosity. I was on my way to this courthouse, in fact, to provide documentation for an ongoing legal matter regarding tenants in the Elmwood district. These documents, she gestured with her cuffed hands toward the plastic bin holding her papers, are official briefs and petitions relevant to the case. Judge LaSalle's gaze shifted to the bin. Recognition flickered in her eyes. She motioned for a bailiff to bring the contents. Flipping through the topmost file, the judge's expression changed from puzzlement to shock. Silence descended. Then a wave of murmurs erupted as lawyers, clerks, and onlookers realized they were in the presence of the very person spearheading a highly anticipated legal initiative, a potential game-changer for housing rights across Riverton. News articles had lauded Henrietta Winston for championing the overlooked. She was, in many ways, the reason new protective measures were expected to pass in the coming month. Judge LaSalle set the file down. Her voice was laced with disbelief. "Officer Clay, are you aware of who Ms. Winston is?" Clay's eyes darted from the judge to Henrietta, then back. "And no, Your Honor," he managed. I just did what I thought was right." She resisted. LaSalle silenced him with a raised hand. "It appears Ms. Winston had every right to secure her documents from unwarranted search. Furthermore, your charges seem spurious." From her vantage point, Henrietta saw the color drain from Officer Clay's cheeks. The hush in the courtroom deepened, thick with tension. A few spectators shifted in their seats, anticipating the judge's next words. The judge instructed the bailiff to unlock Henrietta's cuffs. The metal clattered onto the table. A mix of applause and gasps spread from the courtroom gallery. Some recognized the significance of that symbolic act, freeing a woman who never should have been restrained in the first place. All eyes pivoted to Henrietta as she gently massaged her wrists, the reddened skin a stark reminder of the injustice she'd endured over the last 24 hours. Her gaze traveled toward Officer Clay, whose bravado had all but vanished. LaSalle's tone was stern. "Officer Clay, not only did you fail to properly ascertain Ms. Winston's identity, but your description of events appears inconsistent with standard protocol. Ms. Winston was not given an opportunity to explain before you escalated the situation. This court will not tolerate such conduct." Clay swallowed hard, his eyes darting to the floor. "Your Honor, I did what I thought was best at the time," he muttered. "In that case, what you thought was best was a gross misjudgment," LaSalle retorted. At last, Henrietta was given the opportunity to speak. She approached the podium, standing with a dignity that went beyond her modest appearance. "I've served this community for many years, Your Honor," she said. "My sole purpose yesterday was to meet with fellow advocates and present these documents in support of local families facing housing disputes. I never anticipated that walking down a public sidewalk with a bag of papers would be interpreted as suspicious." Judge LaSalle nodded solemnly. "Your record and contributions to this city speak for themselves, Ms. Winston. The charges against you are hereby dismissed." A wave of relief spread through Henrietta's body. Still, she knew this moment was bigger than her own vindication. She took a small step back, exhaling softly. The tension she'd carried since the arrest began to unwind. One of the lawyers present whispered something to the officer from the prosecution side, apparently pointing out the glaring errors. By now, Officer Clay's face had taken on a gray pallor, and his posture was stiff. For the first time, it seemed he realized the gravity of what he had done, arresting a key city figure, yes, but more importantly, trampling on someone's rights. Henrietta looked him in the eye. "Officer Clay," she said gently, though with undeniable firmness, "my work involves standing up for individuals who are often overlooked or mistreated simply for appearing out of place. I'm sorry that it had to come to this for you to realize how damaging assumptions can be." Clay couldn't meet her gaze. He simply nodded, seeming at a loss for words. The judge then addressed the matter of Officer Clay's conduct. "This court will initiate a formal review of your actions. I expect full cooperation from you and your superiors. In the meantime, you are to be placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the internal investigation." It was a swift blow, administered within the labyrinth of legal protocol. Clay's shoulders slumped further. The sense of power he had once held was noticeably absent. Word spread like wildfire through the corridors. By the time Henrietta gathered her belongings and stepped outside, a small throng of local reporters and curious bystanders had gathered on the courthouse steps. Microphones and cameras jostled for a clear angle, and a flurry of questions bombarded her. "Ms. Winston, do you have any statement about your arrest? How do you feel now that you've been exonerated? Are you pressing charges against the city or the officer?" Henrietta took a moment, one hand resting protectively on her tote bag, the other smoothing her cardigan. She spoke in a calm, measured tone that carried despite the clamor, "This city is my home. I've dedicated my life to ensuring that everyone, no matter their appearance or circumstances, receives fair treatment under the law. Yesterday was a stark reminder that prejudice and impatience can affect anyone at any time. I'm grateful to this court for recognizing my innocence, but I'm more concerned with the countless individuals who face injustice daily and do not have the means or reputation to defend themselves." Her words echoed over the hush that followed. The cameras recorded every syllable. Reporters scribbled furiously. Some onlookers, like the young mother from earlier, stood with tears in their eyes. She was there, hugging her child and gazing at Henrietta with a mixture of relief and admiration. By mid-afternoon, the buzz around Henrietta's arrest and release had spread across Riverton. Social media posts highlighted the irony of an officer arresting the very person who fought hardest for others' rights. Some criticized the police force for heavy-handed tactics. Others lauded Henrietta's poise under pressure. Inside the courthouse, she found a quiet corner and resumed her original purpose, reviewing documents related to the housing case. Even after the day's drama, she insisted on fulfilling her commitment. The families who depended on her had no idea she had just emerged from a night behind bars. Over the next few hours, she worked alongside colleagues, finalizing briefs and checking last-minute details. Occasionally, lawyers would pause to approach her, offering supportive words or apologizing for what she'd endured. Henrietta accepted their sympathies graciously, never losing focus on the task at hand. When the final pages were signed and safely filed, Henrietta at last allowed herself a moment to breathe. She stepped outside to greet the late afternoon sun. The warmth on her skin reminded her that, despite everything, there was still good in the world. She had lived long enough to know that sometimes change takes shape in the unlikeliest of moments. Across the street, she spotted a figure. It was Officer Clay, standing alone on the sidewalk, out of uniform. He must have left the courthouse after the administrative leave order. With a hesitant expression, he raised a hand in a half-wave. Henrietta considered turning away. She'd been through an ordeal. Yet something compelled her to cross the street. As she approached, Clay looked almost childlike in his vulnerability. "Ma'am," he said softly, I'm sorry." She studied his face. There was no trace of the arrogance she'd witnessed before. "Just regret." "I appreciate that," she replied. "I hope this experience teaches you the importance of patience and understanding in your line of work." Officer Clay nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. "I never meant to," he paused, struggling to find the right words. "I was just trying to do my job." Henrietta sighed. "Then let this be a lesson in how to do it better. Every person out there is more than just a potential suspect." They parted ways, the air between them brimming with an unspoken resolution. He walked toward a parked car. She watched him go, wondering if the seeds of empathy had been planted in his heart. By the time Henrietta made her way back to Maplewood Avenue, dusk was settling over Riverton. Streetlights flickered on, illuminating the familiar windows of her apartment building. The day felt impossibly long. She had been arrested at sunrise and cleared of all charges by noon, and had filed crucial legal documents by evening. Outside her building, she noticed the young mother she had helped that morning, now pushing the stroller without groceries. The woman saw Henrietta and hurried over. "Are you all right?" she asked, eyes brimming with concern. "I saw you get taken away by that officer. I couldn't believe it." Henrietta smiled gently, placing a hand on the stroller's handle. "I'm fine now, thanks. Just a misunderstanding that got way out of hand." The mother's face flooded with relief. "I'm so sorry, I couldn't help. I didn't know what to do." Henrietta waved away her worry. "Don't be. You had your child to take care of. But remember, if you ever need help, there are people, like me, who are more than willing to stand up for you." They exchanged a warm nod, and the mother continued on her way. Henrietta lingered on the sidewalk for a moment, staring up at the gentle glow in her apartment window. Home. A place she had nearly lost the freedom to return to if events had spiraled in a different direction. Later that night, sitting at her small table, Henrietta scribbled notes in a worn journal. She jotted down the day's events in precise detail, capturing both her outrage and her resolution. She also made sure to note every official she had spoken with and the future steps for the internal review of Officer Clay's conduct. A cup of herbal tea steamed beside her. Occasionally, she paused to sip, her mind flicking through the possibilities of what might come next. Would the police department institute new training protocols? Would this incident prompt broader community discourse about profiling? How could she use her position to advocate even more effectively for those who lacked her platform? For a brief moment, she considered the alternative scenario: what if I weren't known for my housing rights work? What if I had truly been powerless, no status, no name recognition? She realized how differently the outcome might have turned out. That thought hung in the air, fueling her commitment to keep fighting for real justice. The next day, Henrietta received calls from fellow advocates praising her composure under distress. Some even hinted that her personal ordeal might bring more attention to the housing initiatives. Despite the injustice she had faced, Henrietta saw a glimmer of good emerging from the chaos. And this is where we pose a question to you, dear viewers: have you ever been misjudged because of how you looked or where you were? Share your story in the comments below, and remember to subscribe to our channel for more eye-opening narratives that highlight the importance of empathy, resilience, and hope. The story of Henrietta Winston didn't end with her exoneration. In fact, it spurred a wave of citywide conversations about law enforcement accountability, leading to renewed training procedures in Riverton's police department. Officer Clay, after facing disciplinary measures, eventually reached out to Henrietta to express a more heartfelt apology. While she never condoned his actions, she chose to accept his contrition as a first step toward healing. Because in the end, the real victory came in proving that one person's steadfast refusal to bow to injustice can transform an entire community's perspective. So, the next time you find yourself passing someone on the street who looks a little out of place, remember Henrietta Winston's story. A gentle spirit and unyielding resolve can do far more than most of us imagine. And a single moment of compassion can spark a chain reaction that changes countless lives. This story reminds us all of the power of kindness, the need for humility, and the critical importance of not jumping to conclusions about others. It underlines how even a small ripple, like a seemingly routine police stop, can expand into life-altering consequences. At the heart of it all lies a timeless lesson: we are all more alike than different, each bearing hidden stories and personal burdens. Henrietta's unwavering composure offers a guiding light. It invites us to ask, how would I handle a moment of undeserved humiliation? Do I have the strength to remain calm and dignified, trusting that the truth will eventually prevail? And for those who hold any position of authority, it's a reminder of the responsibility they carry to ensure fairness and respect are at the forefront of their actions. We hope this account moved you to think more deeply about how we treat one another, especially when appearances or first impressions cloud our judgment. If this story resonated with you, we invite you to take a small step in your own life, extend a helping hand, withhold judgment until you know the full story, or stand up for someone who's been dismissed or ignored. Thank you for joining us here on Motivation for Success, where real-life stories meet the everyday heroes who carry hope in their hearts. Don't forget to hit subscribe and stay tuned for more narratives that reveal just how powerful empathy and persistence can be. If this story moved you, consider spreading kindness today. Share a smile, offer your assistance where it's needed, or simply listen more closely to the people around you. After all, you never know whose life you might change, or how they might change yours in return.